Medieval people imagined that somewhere far away there really was mystical monsters. For example, geographers of Western Europe believed that in the east is a huge territory called the Great Tartar. It is probably there that the River of the Dead originates, and the inhabitants of this country once announced to the whole world about the coming of the end of the world. Where was this mystical land? The Great Tartary is a geographical term used mainly by Western European scholars from the 12th to 19th century. They place this state in various parts of Asia, from the Urals and Siberia to Mongolia and China. The borders of Tartary were moving from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean. Other scientists, on the contrary, associate this mysterious country with Turkestan or Mongolia. The origin of Tartary scientists connect with the contamination of two terms at once: ancient Greek Tartarus and the name of the people Tartars. It is believed that the words united in the minds of the inhabitants of Western Europe because of the similarity in sound. The fact is that from the caravans who transported goods from China along the Great Silk Road, the Europeans heard about this mysterious Tartars inhabiting the eastern lands. Since the Chinese, almost all people living in north of the Celestial Empire, including Mongols and Yakuts, that were called Tartars. In the west, a notion was formed that Tartary is a huge power that occupies almost all of Asia. In the 13th century, after the raids of the Mongolians, the attitudes towards the Tartars became negative. They began to be perceived as horrific warriors from the east, the hordes of which want to put an end to the existence of Christian civilization. In the religious texts, it was said that the Tartars are savages, ferocious like demons, sent by Satan himself. In addition, according to the ancient Greek mythology, Tartarus is in an abyss that is under the kingdom of Hades, the world of the dead. Because of the similarity of the Tartars with the name of the pagan hell in Western Europe, the opinion was formed that the Great Tartary is a land where different monsters, including the legendary Gog and Magog, live, and people there worship the Antichrist. Many scientists from Western Europe consider Great Tartary a huge empire stretching from the Urals to the Pacific Ocean. For example, an Italian diplomat in his work Universal Relation, dated 1595, wrote that this country used to be called Scythia, and it occupies half of Asia. However, not all scholars were inclined to give the Great Tartary such vast expanses. Some geographers had this country in Central Asia. Thus, the Encyclopaedia Britannica, Volume 3, 1773, indicates that the state of Tartar is south of Siberia, north of India and Persia, and west of China. This view was also shared by a Swedish researcher. In 1730, he published Geographical Description of the Great Tartary, places the state between Mongolia, Siberia and the Caspian Sea. A number of scientists directly associate Tartary with the birthplace of Genghis Khan. The Italian diplomat who visited Mongolia in 1246 left a bizarre description of this country in his work The History of the Mongols, which we call the Tartars. He combined his travel experiences with medieval mystic legends. For example, the author mentioned firecrackers, people with dog heads and cow hooves, and as well as creatures whose legs do not have joints. Some researchers have mentioned in their works that in a huge empire it's so cold that ice is already shallow under the earth. It was from here, as the French traveller of Hungarian descent Franz Tott believed that the cradle of humanity, in his memoirs on Turks and Tartars, 1784, he wrote that the earliest people migrated from Tartarus to the south and west, populating China, Tibet, India, and later Europe. Many Catholic scholars regarded the border between Europe and Asia as a mythical frontier of good and evil. For example, the English explorer John Speed in 1626 presented to the scientific community the new chart of Tartary, compiled by him. In the publication there was an image of the typical resident of this country. He was wearing clothes worn under Ivan the Terrible. Tartarus was associated with the world of the dead, or a country ruled by evil forces. Although on the very first Russian maps you can find this state, which is explained by the influence of the Western European traditions. Thus Tartary got on the draft of Siberia, which was compiled in 1667. I have read a lot about this state, land, Grand Tartary, that existed for a very long period, and the final civil war between the Moscovian Tartary and Western European parts of it. Parts of it happened in 1775 and is known as Pugachevs. So we have a great amount of talk about Great Tartary. It is said it existed for thousands of years until it was destroyed and wiped out from the histories. Remember what Napoleon said, history is a lie, everybody agreed upon. Why would he say such a thing if he did not know it was a simple, nasty fact? So have Russians shared the same territory with Mongols? Yes, and the Mongols also were absorbed into the Russian culture, hence why today many people in Russia look Mongol, because that's part of their ancestry. So Tartary existed, but it was at the same time shared by the Russian Empire. More precisely, this empire just conquered over the lands of the Tartars. So was Tartary, was it under Russia? Like the hollow earth theory, was this mirrored on the other side of the earth? Or was this just underneath, like a cavern system? Or was it on the surface and just wiped from history? I think we can all agree that Christopher Columbus was a very clever, brave man. In 1492, he was entrusted with the lives of 87 men and 3 boats when he set off across the Atlantic Ocean in search of a fast route to East Asia and the South Pacific. He landed in a place that was unknown to him. There he found treasures, extraordinary trees, birds and gold. He was then entrusted to go back a second time, and this time he took 15,000 colonists on 17 ships. So this was a man of sane mind and someone very trusting and clever. But there was one thing Christopher Columbus was expecting to find, but didn't. Upon his return, in his official report, Christopher Columbus noted that he had discovered a great many islands inhabited by people without number. He praised the natural wonders of the islands. But he added, "I have not found any monstrous men in these lands, as many had thought." Why, one might ask, had he expected to find monsters? In my research, and that of other historians, revealed that Christopher Columbus' views were far from abnormal. For centuries, European intellectuals had imagined a world beyond their borders populated by monstrous races. One of the earliest accounts of these non-human beings was written by the Roman natural historian Pliny the Elder in 77 AD. He told his readers about dog-headed people and creatures with no mouth and no need to eat. Across medieval Europe, tales of marvellous inhuman creatures circulated in manuscripts. Though there were many skeptics, most Europeans believed that the distant lands would be populated by these monsters, and stories of monsters travelled far beyond the libraries of elite readers. Perhaps no one did more to spread the news of monsters than a 14th century English knight named John Mandeville, who, in his account of his travels to faraway islands, claims to have seen people with ears of an elephant. One group of creatures had flat faces with 2 holes, and another that had a head of a man and the body of a goat. Scholars debate whether Mandeville could have ventured far enough to see the places that he described, and whether he was a real person, but his book was copied time and time again, and likely translated into every known European language. Leonardo da Vinci had a copy, and so did Columbus. The old beliefs die hard. Even though Columbus didn't see any monsters, his report wasn't enough to dislodge the ideas of the creatures Europeans expected to find in parts of unknown places. In 1493, around the time Columbus' first report began to circulate, printers of the Nuremberg Chronicle, a massive volume of history, included images and descriptions of monsters, and soon after the explorer's return, an Italian poet offered a verse translation describing Columbus's journey, which its printer illustrated with monsters. Indeed, the belief that monsters had lived on Earth's edge remained for generations. In the 1590s, the English explorer Sir Walter Raleigh told readers about the American monsters he heard about in his travels to Guinea, some of which had their eyes in their shoulders. Even though Christopher Columbus didn't see any monsters on his journey, it was only a matter of a couple of years later, in 1521, during the Spanish and Aztec War.
Cuauhtemoc's last-ditch effort to push back the Spaniards was to elect a sacred Quetzal warrior. Placed in a ceremonial costume covered with resplendent feathers and made to look massive by way of wooden frames, this warrior scared the Spaniards.
The Spanish campaign declared victorious on August 13, 1521, when a coalition army of Spanish forces and natives, led by Herman Cortés, captured the capital of the Aztec Empire.
Pushing through, this warrior is said to have captured 3 men at once and dragged them to Cuauhtemoc for immediate sacrifice. The Spaniards began to withdraw, and Mexica morale increased as the Quetzal pushed further.
Do you really think this was a man? The description matches what we know the Anunnaki look like. So was they trying to recreate the Anunnaki warriors, or was this a real Anunnaki warrior? And where did he disappear to? Why couldn't they find the body?
But this final act of valor could not turn the tide of the siege. As reported by native sources, the warrior dropped from a terrace, never to be seen again.
St. Patrick's Day is celebrated by millions of people all across the globe. The absence of snakes on Ireland gave rise to the stories of St. Patrick driving them into the sea. However, all evidence suggests that post-glacial Ireland never had snakes. At no time has there ever been any suggestion of snakes in Ireland. So there was nothing for Patrick to banish. People think the snakes were rather a metaphor for the Druids, who Patrick is said to have driven out of Ireland when he established Christianity there. But in my view, not only was the Emerald Island of Ireland overtaken by Nagas or semi-human reptilians in Buddhist mythology. This is where the myths of the dragon come from. The draconian creatures, as well as shape-shifting individuals, have been around for a long time. They live among us as royals and underneath us in domes, located not only in California, Nevada, and particular out near Dulce, New Mexico. The networks that extend throughout this world, as it did in ancient times. Of course, it's all hard to believe. Legend has it that these mythical beings overran Ireland, just as they had ancient India, Sri Lanka, and much of the ancient world. One part of this druid class were the bards, whose job it was to remember all of the history of the people, as well as record current events. Because the Irish Celts did not rely on written language, everything had to be memorised. Bards were poets and musicians, and used music and poetry to help them remember their history exactly. Because of this, bards were highly respected members of the Irish society. The Irish believed that history was very important, for if you didn't remember what happened in the past, you couldn't safely plan for the future. Bards, therefore, held the future of the people in safekeeping. Beowulf is the longest epic poem in Old English, the language spoken in Anglo-Saxon England before the Norman conquest. more than 3,000 lines long, Beowulf relates to the exploits of a hero and his successive battles with a monster named Grendel, with Grendel's revengeful mother and with a dragon which was guarding a hoard of treasure. Any of you that's seen the film Beowulf, where Angelina Jolie is portrayed as a half snake, half woman, he makes love to her and gives birth to a child. But this is so similar to the story of the Scythian people. Is this also telling the story of St. Patrick? So if my account of history is correct, and we didn't come here till 6,000 years ago, Europeans, then that means then that the Nagas would have been here before us, and they would have been living in caves, and these would have been the leftover Anunnaki. Also the stories of giants in Ireland. Doesn't it all add up? We know the Anunnaki were giants. And the story of the Scythian people, yet their origin story, talked of Hercules making love to a half snake, half reptilian woman. And then you have these stories of the snake-headed woman in Greek mythology. Half snake, half woman. So it's not just the Nagas in India, they're all throughout European culture.
We can visit other people with their habitation. We can keep track. If there's something very important to be developed from the moon, I'm not sure what it is right now. And I sure think we should identify what it is for America to make such gross expenditures, again, for human habitation on the moon. We can help. We can join with. Together, we can explore the moon and develop the moon. We should go boldly where man has not gone before. Fly by the comets, visit asteroids, visit the moon of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato-shaped object that goes around Mars once in 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're going to say, who put that there? Who put that there? Well, the universe put it there. If you choose, God put it there.